Good to be here, sir.
Excellent. Great to have you. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by our guest today, Whynde Kuehn. She's the author of an awesome new book called Strategy to Reality. Tucker, maybe you can put the link up for it. So it's Strategy to Reality, making the impossible possible for business architects, change makers, and strategy execution leaders. Our sponsor today is Spotlight.ai, who's a value intelligence sponsor of Sales Community. So certainly value intelligence, value selling plays into any company in terms of not just their offering, but their product market fit, and then obviously their sales side. And Spotlight AI does a great job with that. And for those that are members of Sales Community, thank you so much. If you're not, you can go to salescommunity.com/winterfree, or just go to salescommunity.com and you can see the upper left-hand corner. There's the free link or the link where you can pay to join. Believe it or not, some people still will pay here and there, but I recommend the free one, and lots of great content in there, as well as our prior 109 podcasts. And you can see we're actually scheduled out weekly now for about, I think, 25 months through beginning of March 2025. So hopefully I'll still be alive by then. We'll see. And we have Tucker behind the scenes. So Tucker, as always, thanks so much for your help. So I've got some intro comments, as we always do. So from Rick Diana, who's a good friend, Sales Community Advisory Board member, and he does a lot, but I call him the star talent agent. So Rick says, Whynde is an incredible human being and servant leader with the charm of a Midwesterner, the attitude of a New Yorker, and the stamina of a marathoner. She's the preeminent author of on business architecture worldwide. Whynde's numerous and varied testimonials include a bevy of clients, business partners, loyal staff associates, peers, and fans across the globe who attest to her mastery of business architecture. Her debut business book, Strategy to Reality, hit the streets this past September. I have one and love it. The book is one-of-a-kind manifesto designed for business architects, executives, and change makers to embolden their strategy, execution, decision-making, and organization and ecosystem design. It describes the why and the what of business architecture and how to build a strategic function in an organization. When I first met Whynde and asked her what her short-term goals were, she simply replied for the book to reach every pair of hands it is meant to be in. So that basically means probably anybody in business, you could be in education, anything that almost exists, I guess. While she loves exploring creative solutions and enjoys the potential of a bestseller in the making, for sure a bestseller in the making, it is also very much within her values to do good every step along the way. So very nice there. From Robert Field, who's the VP of Global Information Technology and Digital Solutions at Presupart, says Whynde is visionary in the world of business architecture, sharing her expertise and applying best practices across all industries. Her approach to strategy implementation has revolutionized the way companies should approach their business objectives, fostering a culture of collaboration that consistently elevates success rates. Beyond her professional accomplishments, Whynde is known for her selflessness and genuine desire to help others without asking for anything in return. It's no wonder she's referred to as the embodiment of generosity and kindness, making her truly one of a kind. Wow, pretty amazing there, huh? So
I am truly lucky.
Only recently get to know Whynde through our mutual friend Rick, but so far so good on all those comments for sure. And really impressive. She's a little close to the vest on some of the customers, but some small companies like FedEx, Allianz, GM, VF Corp. So has helped some real big players, some very senior executive teams that have major strategy groups. So even though they have people that have strategies a full time, the executive leadership team has strategies as a full time, they still enable her help and her services. She actually is our first guest. She lives in Norway with her husband Asbjorn. Hopefully I got that right. And besides work, she also enjoys ultra marathoning, mountaineering, and immersion trips, which is not quite vacations, but it's a way of kind of giving back and exploring and helping others. So certainly a fantastic background. So let's jump into the questions here so we can help our audience gain incredible insights from you, Whynde. So interestingly enough, you're actually born and grew up in Wisconsin. So you went to University of Wisconsin. You had a biochem degree, but then you ended up going into Icon Information Systems.
What happened? Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
So,
I
so
am,
tell us about the
yeah,
first job.
yeah, you bet. I'm very much a science person by nature, but have been steeped in business pretty much since I stepped out of college. So the real backstory there is I was going to be a veterinarian, which explains the science degree, but decided at the last minute to take a different course. And that's how I ended up at Icon. Interestingly enough, started working as a temp for a very big client, GE. So that's sort of where I cut my teeth in consulting. And actually, Icon ended up making a position for me. They saw potential in me. So that's very much the beginning of my career, and it unfolds from there.
Oh, great. Maybe quickly just kind of go through what you did from there.
You bet. So after that, so actually a similar feel from today. We had the dot com sort of burst, so out of work. Now at that time, sort of drawing on savings, what's going to happen? I'm a pretty new professional. Very young, I pivoted. So I couldn't get a full-time job. So I started working for myself. And one of the clients I was working at for was Doug Hackney, actually one of the top data warehousing professionals at that time. So I was in the data warehouse heyday, which is actually interesting because years later, I would sort of unknowingly follow in the footsteps of Doug as creating ideas, being a thought leader, kind of, this new innovation cycle that I've sort of created this wave worldwide around. So data warehousing, then long story short, I end up working and building a business transformation and architecture practice, building it up from the ground to 100 people based in Chicago. And then I left that company in 2017 to form S2E Transformation, which is where I am at today. And the big reason there, even though I sort of left my baby, left this team that I had grown, was to give me the ultimate freedom to be able to serve a global vision and a global community every day in the way I saw best fit. Yeah.
That's great. Very, very, very impressive. So from a high level, your kind of the thesis is, okay, strategy is important. Companies have a hard time figuring out what is a strategy, how can they get that down into some specific micro steps. So maybe kind of start from there in terms of what you see as the gap and the need.
Right on. It is because there is a true gap between strategy and execution. We see it in statistics that abound still. We see it in gaps in graduate business curriculum. We did a study just a couple years back to actually identify this. So, what happens in a lot of organizations worldwide is we have these really great big ideas, but there is a leap and a gap to actually get them into coordinated action across organizational structures, across products, across geographies. And part of that is the dynamic of sometimes organizational structures where you have different leaders or teams or parts of the organization that are doing that translation. They're all, translating the same idea, but the way they do it is disconnected. So we end up with duplicate solutions, tech debt, fragmented experiences, right? All these sorts of things that we don't want to end up with. And questionably, are all these initiatives and solutions actually going to add up to deliver on the strategy it was supposed to? So what I'm really about is what I call clear intent translated into organized effort. So how do we really make sure strategies and business direction are clear and can be understood at the various levels of the organization? And then how do we use a business blueprint to sort of map out what changes do we need to make so that we can be coordinated on a macro level before we do all the micro level details?
Yeah, no, I don't know if you're familiar. We didn't talk about this in our prep, but I've had carried with me, and I have somewhere, the Harvard Business case study on it's just simply kind of what is strategy, and what I like is not that's helpful and it's nice, but kind of yours has kind of the building blocks that really helps you kind of get in the weeds. So ultimately, you can kind of bring it down to an individual contributor. And there's a few good charts I'll try and get to here. This is business architecture, domains, and key relationships, but if you think about the kind of business architecture and strategy, if you can kind of see it here, I mean, a lot of times you might think about, okay, there's maybe, 2 or 3 or 4 kind of swim lanes or things you got to think about. And, here there's, 15, you got the stakeholders, policies, capabilities, strategies, organization, information, products, value streams, initiatives, metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sure a lot of times just coming in and just kind of defining these different pieces is kind of the probably half the battle, right?
It sure is, and defining them, and then also defining them across perspectives, across different, people from different parts of the organization, because it's sort of the elephant touching parable, right? We see different parts of the organization, but we don't necessarily see the whole or understand the whole. So that's the key, and that actually creates a pretty big mindset shift.
No, that's great. And then this other one kind of, I think it gets more in the weeds and the elbow grease of it, but the role of business architecture across strategy execution. So maybe you can kind of briefly touch on that, because to me, I kind of visualize, okay, this is kind of the working sessions where people break out in functional groups and say, okay, let's kind of define and figure out and assess and figure out what we're going to do or not do. So what's a kind of a deeper explanation there?
100%. So, and it's a circle, right? Because we're always going around. So, it's first,
I can
defining what we. Oh, I love
keep
it.
it up.
First, defining what we
No,
want to
keep it up
do.
where you're talking. Yeah.
And so, having this blueprint helps people to actually understand sort of the what if scenario, right? What if we do this strategic option or that? What's the butterfly effect? Then secondly, we're going to architect the changes. That's where the new magic happens. That's where we say, all right, collectively, what's the big stuff we need to harmonize on? If this is our strategy or what we want to do, what are the capabilities we want to invest in to actually make that work? Do we have them? How well are they working? Now let's shape the initiatives. That's the next stage. And then we are into solutioning and actually making sure we measure results. To be really clear, this is not trying to imply that waterfall is the way to go, right? There's a lot of iteration, a lot of flex in there, but it's acknowledging sort of these big chunks of things that we do, indeed. And there's another point I would say is, the architecture, sort of the golden thread, right, allows us to keep this continual balance and alignment between strategy, the capabilities we're investing in, and the initiatives and solutions, especially if we need to replan what we're doing very quickly. Indeed.
Yeah. Now, tell me, I don't know if you can mention by name, but certainly of some of the customers, we can mention the FedEx, the Allianz, the GM kind of VF Corp. So you think, okay, they've got these massive groups, they know strategy, they know what they can do, how they can do it. So what is the kind of differentiator with you in terms of what you can do that they can't do or don't do?
They are looking for this competitive advantage to better and quicker turn ideas into action. I mean, I think that's actually a magic power, right? Because here's why this is important, right? Because with the pressure of, first of all, customer transparency and the pressure of constant digital, connected, global world change, coming on the heels of very fresh memories like the pandemic and political unrest, organizations now realize change. We're not transforming and then we're done and then we get to hang out for a decade.
Yeah.
We have got to build a new muscle to continually get ideas into action and be able to change on a dime. So that's actually, when they come to me, that's the ability that they want to have. And my approach is to build it into their own organization and capacity and processes, right? So I'm only there to outsource and help and guide because this is what they need the ability to do. But it is arguably new competitive advantage, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of like a muscle that they may not quite have developed in effect, correct?
Indeed. And I say it's, this when you look at the statistics that organizations, especially big ones, they don't have good success rates at getting ideas into action, but it's almost become like this rock that they have in their shoe. We just get so used to it that we just keep pushing the effort and it begins to seem normal. But now, pressure of more change is making people say, all right, listen, we got to do something about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you see the, I'll say the pressure point or the kind of the group pushing it more kind of the board or kind of the CEO or executives or kind of, where do you think they kind of, not, I'll say maybe they wake up eventually and say, geez, okay, we got to go do something.
Fantastic question. I personally see The push coming from strategy and transformation groups, especially. Also, some strategic planning, right, as they're trying to organize there. And then also, like the CIO, right, the technology leaders, because they're on the other side of this. They also are looking for the business context to try to make sense of all the work and the business priority and the ability to speak the business language as well to get done what we need to.
Oh, great. So we have a comment from Daryl. He says, "Hi, Randy. Rick invited me. Best Daryl." So good reminder for me. So anybody watching along, feel free to comment and more importantly, ask any questions. Whynde can, this is probably a full semester or a couple semester course at any college or university that we're trying to pack into an hour here. So for me, I would think you have lots of companies that think they have a strategy, but all it is just kind of very kind of short-term tactical items. So how do you kind of force them to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what is this? How do you take a step back and kind of help formulate that?
That is such a key question because it starts there. One of my favorite books is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt, which it calls out these sorts of things that, as you're saying, we very much see in practice. And no one really wants to hear, hey, you don't have a strategy or a good strategy, right? Particularly when we're sort of, have taken a while maybe to create some of these ideas. So there's a delicacy in how we go about this. Sometimes we can point those things out. Hey, you're giving people three big pillars to try to execute on, and they're all going in a bunch of different directions to do that. Let's
Yeah.
create more clarity. Or what we can do is all sorts of approaches. The more political way to do it is to say, here's the ideas we took, here's how we translated them. Let us play it back to you. Here's how we're planning to invest. Here's how we're planning to advance the organization from a capability and technology perspective. Does this make sense to you? And they can either, agree or disagree. And I have found over, a period of, months and years, we actually, through those conversations, give feedback back to the leaders in the strategy team where they formulate clearer and clearer strategies and goals and objectives going forward. Yeah.
Gotcha. So opposite from that, the whole kind of vision statement and mission statement, and you're always good to disagree, but I'd say kind of half the time nobody pays attention, nobody cares. But to me, that's almost kind of the first domino, which I would think, okay, the vision is kind of where we going to aspire to, whatever, 5, 10 years down the road. Mission, there are kind of maybe some more things underneath that. Kind of how do you think of those two things?
100%. The vision and the mission are the anchors, right? And where I've seen organizations do really well, like a USAA, which is a really mission driven organization, they start meetings. That mission is so ingrained in their culture, and it shows what a solidly grounded, company can do. But I agree with you. Those are sort of the blocks that we anchor back to, and they're also the things that nobody kind of thinks about on a day-to-day basis unless you bring it up. Where things start to change, which is where I focus, is the strategies, the goals, the objectives, the metrics, the courses of actions, right? The where we play, how we win. And that's where we spend most of our time because that's where the change is happening. Yeah. And that's where we need to be really clear.
So what percent of time would you say the vision and mission are either a joke or incomplete or not used as a broad general statement?
Do I have to answer that question?
Yeah.
In the 90% easily.
Isn't that crazy?
Easily. To me, it's the anomaly, like the USAAs, that really make it part of their DNA. Those are the anomalies.
Yeah, and even you see it in their TV commercials. I mean, right? I mean, you just get the feel of kind of what they're about, how they want to do it. Notwithstanding having Gronk for a spokesperson or commercials, but that helps get the point across, right? Okay, no, we don't want Gronk. So hysterical. So all right, so Daryl chimed in here. Thanks, Daryl. What changes do you recommend that the C-suite undertake to address the new hybrid work culture? Great question, Daryl. Thanks.
Great question, and a really, really big question too. I think part of what we're realizing worldwide is there is no one size fits all. So I think the first thing is just starting to, understand what's our culture. And even looking at the population of people that we have in an organization. Even in an organization, people have different jobs, people need to be co-located. So I really think it's just making educated assessments and decisions based on the landscape of the organization, who are the people in it, and most importantly, what are we trying to achieve for the customer, and how do we best give people life balance and options and choices, but make sure we're there to serve that customer in the way we need to.
Yeah. So I do weekly posts. I might be old school, but to me, it's kind of like the pendulum. Okay, I get COVID. You want to be sympathetic and empathetic, but it's like, okay, get your ass back in the office. And yeah, people might enjoy working from wherever location, but kind of just that teamwork and bonding and osmosis. Just think about what gets lost, especially with the younger folks, right? I mean, they like it and it's good, but kind of just from a development, personal, professional, let alone all the potential mental risk exposures that they have.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And you even highlight it also matters where someone is on their career trajectory as well, not only type of work and things like
Yeah.
that. Absolutely. Yeah.
But that even as a lead, so you can make the argument for the early in career. You're not allowed to say ages anymore. So the early in career folks, but then those even as a senior leader. I mean, in jobs that I had, the ability to kind of the thing was management by walking around, but kind of be able to walk around and engage in the water cooler and just know and get a pulse for what's going on. I mean, these days, either if you're a sales leader, fortunately enough, you can be out on the road, hopefully. But then the other executive functions, okay, it's just these Zooms and maybe kind of a Zoom, beverage hour or something like that. But it's still kind of not the same, for kind of really getting through. So in today's hybrid environment, as you're putting together the strategy, and again, I may be the weird guy, but to me, the best ideas always would come up, from the individual contributor kind of on up. So how do you make sure as the executive suite is, in the glass bubble, how do you make sure
Mhm.
they actually have perspectives and fresh ideas for what they're trying to consider for their strategy?
Absolutely. And that all those people who are bubbling up those ideas have the forums and the opportunities to see and generate those ideas that come from personal interaction or interaction with customers or whatever it might be. Yeah.
So how do you do it in this wacky hybrid world?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's just understanding, like, you can't make a blanket plan for everybody. It's a targeted, like, lay out the, capabilities or functions of the organization, understand the different type of work and workers we have in them, and then crafting different plans around that to understand what flexibility we need. It just because to me it looks different from certain days per week in the office, or you even have, what if you're fully remote or not, but you have this slack going all day when you're trying to do work. So it's like all these things need to be sort of revisited a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, crazy. So Rick, thanks. Rick says we don't want Gronk. It'll be interesting to see if he and Brady and Edelman and others end up in Vegas or not. But
Yeah.
so now we have from John Erickson. So Erickson, that's a very Norwegian name, right?
It is indeed, indeed.
All
Yeah.
right, right off the what was the original? Was it Leif Erikson or whatever his name was, right?
Yeah,
The
exactly.
original was that the original
Exactly.
Viking or whatever Viking leader?
John can jump in here.
There you go. All right, John. All right. So John asks, how do you see organizations bringing this to the doers? That is, those who are doing the nuts and bolts of business architecture and bringing your notion of strategy to reality, a true reality for their organization.
This is a big change management Swedish, John says, yeah, that's it.
Swedish.
I
Okay.
got it.
Sorry.
Indeed, indeed.
Swedish,
Yeah,
Norwegian. I'm in Colorado, so not to
yeah.
anyway.
Thanks, John. John, this is a very good and a very important change management question, right? So, how do you bring a new discipline, a new idea to an organization? That's a new function. That's really the magnitude of what we're talking about here. So, to bring it to the doers, right? So there's two sides of this. One, there's the doers, the people who will create the business architecture and play a unique and often missing role to inform and translate strategy, right? There's an actual new role around that. It's business architect. It's been in place for a while, but more emerging. But then there's also, how do you actually change the rest of the organization to be able to do cohesive end-to-end strategy execution where you have accountability and you, as we were saying earlier, right, you actually look at it as a muscle and you actually know how the teams work together and fit together. A lot of organizations don't do that. That is a bigger vision for strategy execution, and people will need to use the business architecture across that whole chain. So perfect world, this honestly starts as a C-suite, or we see it, like I said earlier, strategy or transformation. It might be incubated, but it needs to become an idea that is drip by drip, infused into the mindset of how we think, how we make decisions around capabilities, um, and how we embed it into the processes from strategy to execution. So, John, I know that's sort of a generic answer to your very important question, but it's just really eating this elephant bit by bit and being very strategic about it and knowing that we have a new vision for how we want to do strategy execution in our organization.
Yeah, and trying to equate it maybe over to the sales world, but different examples where maybe you want to go after an SMB market, maybe you want to go after a healthcare vertical market. So, yeah, a sales rep can say, "Hey, let's just go sell to them," but in fact, you have so many other pieces. You need skill sets, you need competencies, you have to have industry expertise around that. You have to take a look at the TAM and say, "Okay, how competitive is it? Okay, the first year we're gonna, we think we can, sell, I'll make it up, $10 million. Okay, so we sell $10 million. Kind of what's our OpEx? What do we need for the different feet on the street, externally that are doing the sales and the pre-sales and the post-sales and the marketing, and then kind of internally, are there additional skill sets and trainings and things like that that we need to do?" So it's kind of a practical idea that, not just as a company how they look at things, but obviously different business units and groups as you're trying to spin up something. Ultimately, it all flows through kind of from a P&L. So it's
Mhm.
great that you put together these initiatives, but I'm sure ultimately it ends in some specific metrics saying, okay, here's where we're at. Now, by doing this, if I'm the CFO, okay, Whynde, we just came in, we just spent millions of dollars or whatever it is on you. And now what do all I care about is, okay, I don't call it mumbo jumbo, but all the stuff you came
Mhm.
up with, kind of
Yep.
show me the money with kind of our revenue and our margin, and then what's our profitability going to be?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Indeed, and because the key link here is this what we said we were going to do? Is this what we did? And actually being able to thread that together,
Yep.
have the data in a repository, and hold people accountable. That is absolutely the idea. Because we kind of, especially if it's a big idea, it loses traction after a while, and we kind of forget sometimes, right?
And then we'll spin that. So big idea, assume you need to have a kind of senior executive as a sponsor. And then with these different big ideas or initiatives, you have that senior executive who's accountable, responsible. They'll have a cross-functional group kind of high and low in the org, but that person kind of is the one throat to choke, correct?
Indeed, 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 indeed. Yep.
Yeah.
And with clear direction, people can actually be more autonomous, right, in what they're doing and how they're executing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So as a lead in, Tucker, to Daryl's question, I'll pull up, so talking about specific metrics. So this has, you have what's the strategy, the goal, the objective, the metric, the course of action, value stream impacts, capability impact, initiative, but kind of really, paring that down to whatever it is as a high, okay, I'll make it up. Okay, we want to go after the healthcare market, random example I
Mhm,
just said. And then, okay,
uh-huh,
what are the specific metrics that we want to do around there? Initially the first 3 months from a sales perspective, it may be, okay, we have to kind of hire some, core expertise, some competencies, and then maybe, okay, we
mhm,
want to have pipeline, and then kind of you have some thought process to say, here's the dominoes, how they're going to progress, which are ultimately going to end in revenue. So let's see here. So Daryl's question is, what will be the new performance metrics for this new hybrid environment? So do you really think are there going to be different metrics, say now as you're advising consulting versus what it was 5 years ago pre-COVID? I don't know.
To me, it's not the metrics are not so much on the hybrid environment. It's more, how is the hybrid environment and how is the technology, and right, the world shifts, how is that providing opportunities for us to innovate or shift who we are, or disruptions that we need to react to, and how are we measuring those things? I mean, generally speaking, hybrid effectiveness, maybe things like that, like how is it working? But from the strategy perspective, I don't know that they're changing, other than we have a lot more new things to consider in disruption than we used to.
Oh, there you go. So Robert asked, John's question is great. Where do we go? John's question is great, but how much do we get? How much do we get it to be adopted? Much like project management has become mainstream, maybe the sales world has some insight.
Love it.
Yeah. So I'd
Well,
say it's interesting. So obviously I'm biased to the sales side, but one of my beefs is sales versus marketing, right? So sales is so accountable revenue wise. Okay. The OpEx gets micromanaged. Everybody's the expert. Okay. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And then not to offend any marketing people, there's lots of great marketing groups, but then you got marketing who's kind of like not quite willy-nilly, but they're kind of spending, they have their staff a lot of time outsources the help. And you're like, okay, well, why do we have you? And then you have these, MQLs, which are marketing qualified leads, which aren't necessarily sales qualified leads. So that whole thing is to me, I guess the summary comment would be tied into Robert's question would be that, really how objectively metric are the non-sales functions?
okay. So love the question, Rob. And when we're saying get it to be adopted, I assume that's the idea of business architecture powered, right?
Yeah.
Strategy execution, right?
Good news is you're answering the question, so you can interpret the question however
I
you
love
want.
it. Perfect. Um, but I really like where you're going, Randy, because one massive thing that we're missing is the whole book of success stories and metrics in what I call ROBAI, return on business architecture investment. Now, part of it
Ooh,
is because it's a newer idea. Part of it is because, as we were saying earlier, this is competitive advantage. So a lot of big companies have been close to the vest. They don't want to share their metrics and what they're doing because it's their competitive advantage. But I think the bigger question or the bigger picture here, because this is sort of my role and my passion, is to really get this right, these ideas adopted and over this crossing the chasm of the innovation curve. I think we need to have two big forces. One is we need these ideas in university, and we're starting to see it, right? Going into business schools and executive education. That's one place because executives can't get it cold, as some random idea when they're working. They need to get it there. And then secondly, it's just, more the boardroom, right? More of the mainstream business literature, because once we have more executive and academic, I really think it's going to cross the chasm and take off. And I will say just a tiny example. We're seeing generational change already. I'm dating myself, but I had a woman who worked for me as a business architect a long time ago. She's now the CEO of a very big company in the States that you would recognize. She called me and said, it's been too long, but I need to get business architecture and, when are we working together? So she's a good example of what it means to switch over a generation. We didn't have to sell her. We didn't have to give her the numbers. She knows it makes sense because nothing else did. So yeah, yeah.
that's great. Man, I love the concept business architecture, right? So you think of a architect, right? Kind of, designing what you do and how you do it. And before we started talking, you think about, okay, well, strategy, it's kind of more of a softer thing. It's not quite as, metric and objective and formulaic. And okay, you're going to put, draw this, you're going to have the, whatever, the 2x4s, and then you're going to have the, whatever sheetrock over it. Then you're going to have the windows and you're going to have the wallpaper. And then all of a sudden it's going to look nice, but you kind of have that kind of thought process of business architecture is so awesome. And then I'll date myself. So going back to my EMC days back 1985, the co-founders were Dick Egan and Roger Marino. So every quarter we would have all hands meetings. So this was at the time I was the 33rd employee, and then it grew to obviously hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. But one of the core things that was awesome, they'd bring everybody together and they would go through per functional area. So you'd have sales, you'd have marketing, you'd have customer service, you'd have engineering, you'd have manufacturing, HR, legal, kind of, all I'm forgetting about. And they have kind of, their 5 top goals. And then each leader would have to get up for that functional area. So if it was sales, it'd be Roger Marino would get up and go through, okay, here's where our goals were, here's how we did. And then based on that, then it would be kind of a group kind of yelling and screaming to, what type of grade did they get, right? So it was, A or B or C or B plus or B minus, but it was so magical because you had the level of accountability for the leader. anybody that was on the team knows, okay, here's exactly, if I'm the administrator, kind of greeting people come in as we're hiring and growing, okay, and support that we've got a great culture and people are, well thought of, and I'm personable and I'm not a stiff. So kind of, starts, I'd say, with the, admin at the front door, who at the time actually was Dick Egan's wife, Maureen, all these fantastic people. But you just think about kind of going through that as a review,
Mhm.
everybody's on the same page, and then figuring out, okay, as an individual, yeah, here's how I kind of fit into that. And that kind of is a basic, very, very basic operating framework, kind of seems is like totally lost these days, right?
Yeah, and then they can also together hear, okay, if you're doing that, that means this to me, right? Because that's the
Right.
other part is how do all the pieces fit together? Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. Well, and then now put on it hybrid and Zoom and things like that, it becomes trickier to do those things sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'd never know. So obviously sales would always say, oh, hey, what does customer service do? Manufacturing, engineering. You're like, wow, they're doing all that. And that's, the
Yeah.
pressure point, and how can we help? But just that whole collaboration was really magical. Okay. So Tucker, where are we here? Are we Jamie, I think? So great. So Jamie, thank you. A whole bunch of different degrees. I don't know what they mean, but very, very impressive. As someone, as some who is often tapped to lead, as someone who's often tapped to lead large global transformation initiatives, do you recommend creating business architecture from the bottom up position, or does it need to begin top down? So top down, bottoms up.
Fantastic question. Well, first of all, ideally top down with business sponsorship, create a cross-functional group of business people because the business people own the business architecture. As architects, we may steward it, but here's the counterpoint to that, which gets to some of these questions, Rob and John have mentioned around change. We also start where we can start, right? And so, Jamie, others, if you're in this situation, take the opportunity to build the business architecture bottom up, but with one very, very, very important caveat. And that is you have to build with the big picture in mind. So don't go too deep. Don't make another silo. That's the key because this is our chance to think differently about that blueprint. So just sketch out the big rocks and then use that opportunity to, you know, build out the parts you can and get some buy-in so that it can go back up to the top.
Yeah, I was always big. Great question, Jamie. Thanks. I was always big on kind of putting together a SWAT team or best practices. So you want to get good executive attention awareness, and I'll beat to death the healthcare example. But so if somebody would come and say, okay, hey, anybody in the organization, individual contributor, let's do a healthcare vertical. Okay, great. So why don't you get somebody from all the different functional areas together? You're the healthcare SWAT team. You can lead the charge, and kind of here's the things we got to get together and think about, so that way everybody's happy and come up with something of a P&L. Then they can kind of present that. So that's kind of one way that kind of a bottoms up, not just having all the different ideas, but saying, hey, take accountability and responsibility to help lead the charge. And guess what? If you're able to kind of lead that charge, you're probably fantastic, high performer, potential to get up into management someday as well.
Yep. Lead from any position. Absolutely.
Okay, so Tucker, can you pull up what we got next? Okay, Daryl, as the company is creating this new strategy and it is developed by the team, with the changes that occur in a company, how do you recommend for them to capture this intellectual capital?
Yeah. So both strategy and blueprint that will shift as appropriate, right? Based on that strategy. Perfect world lives in a knowledge base, in a business knowledge base. And in theory, anyone and everyone should have access to that, right? For to be able to use it. But that's a fantastic question, Darrell. It should be captured in a business knowledge base that we use. The key is, putting some principles around that so we can stay organized and making it at a high enough level so that you don't have to jump into all the details, but you have a way to sort of navigate through capabilities and value streams, right? The higher level focal points before you get to all the details. But that is exactly what we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember the old days, joke used to be, you can leave your strategic plan on a plain seat. It's really obviously there's a lot that has to get done to do that, but really the trick is in the execution. And do you
Right.
have the right muscle memory and the right organization and the right culture to actually execute on that plan? So that's kind of another perspective, right?
That's right. 100%. 100%.
Yeah. And then just going back, talking about some of the hybrid work things. This coming, I do a weekly column in LinkedIn. It might be old school, but and the 4-day work week is kind of a topic. So I've had some people kind of debating that. For me, I don't want to be insensitive, but I think that's a complete joke. So do you have any point of view? And it's totally fine if you disagree.
And which part was that,
It's
Randy?
a 4-day work week as opposed to kind of what we have now, which is I'd argue is 5 to 7.
Well, I might be a bad one to ask, as those who know me in the audience might say. Um, I'll say it this way. I think it's possible for some jobs. I don't think it's possible for all jobs. And I also think individuals can and should have their own preferences. For example, I don't want a 4-day work week. I want the ability to work where I want to work, be passionate and dive into that, and then go climb a mountain for a month, right? And go off the grid. So I I don't think it's realistic for everybody, certainly, because there's also the really big thing that comes to my mind is what about the customers? First of all, what do we need to do to cover the customers and serve them when and how they need? And if we can, orchestrate our 4-day work weeks around that, great. But I just don't think that's always possible. So I think it takes more creative than across the board solution. And I know there's all sorts of studies and things happening on it. And then second, I also think it's important not to, just like we did with the 5-day work week, don't shoehorn individuals into, a one size fits all. So I have to say, I'm very much with you on the 4-day work week for my own reasons. Yep.
That's right. And let's see here. We have a LinkedIn user, which Tucker says, I think, is Dave Knorr. So another fantastic strategy executive coach, consultant, et cetera, et cetera. Says, Whynde, great to see you on TSI with Randy. What are the top 3 business relationship challenges you've observed in bridging strategy formulation to execution?
Love it. And great to hear from you, Nor. Big fan. Top three relationship challenges. The first I would say is from the strategy to the architecture, which could be the strategy team or the leaders to the architecture, because that's a new piece there, right? Sometimes it's very automatic, and thank God these are the ideas we've been looking for. And sometimes it can actually feel like we're used to shaping the initiatives, and now there's a little bit of taking away something, right? So forming partnership and is really important there. I think the second one, there can be relationship challenges around certain other design disciplines. And it's not a matter of that there actually oftentimes is no challenge there, but it's a matter of, hey, this business architecture stuff or what we're talking about with strategy, formulation, execution, this sounds like what we do in whether it's process or a business analyst role. So it's just, again, needing to have the conversations about here's how we can work together for the bigger picture. Here's the value that we can bring to you, the new value. And by the way, we're not trying to take your job. And then the third one, and I don't mean to be trite, but it is often between the business and technology. And so just trying to truly bridge that and bringing technology into the strategic conversations and being able to better communicate within the business language and context and priority. So those are the 3. If I had to pick, I would do.
There you go. Well done. And thanks, Nor. I mean, going back, probably 10, 20 years ago, right? Organizations started having if you call it the CIO or CTO, kind of the key technology executive, having those actually report to the CEO. Previously, they were traditionally kind of buried under probably a CFO, but kind of having that person have a seat at the table, just as all the other, functional leads are, I think kind of helps that a lot. And then I'll just kind of pull up what I did before, but your first chart actually talks about the business architecture domains and the key relationships. So to the point, there's, obviously the 3 you mentioned, but kind of, nothing works unless you have that kind of working group, the relationship. So you must have times where you have to, maybe you're like, Dr. Laura or something like that, where you say, okay, kind of how do you break down? There's just all this past history of people just not getting along or gelling or teaming or anything like that. So do you have any example where you've kind of had to come in and kind of, not that they're best friends, but they can at least kind of collaborate and work together better?
Oh, sure. Well, so part of it starts with engagement model and understanding who are the people in our world and what value do we provide to them? What do we exchange? So For sure. It always comes down to the human stuff, right? Especially when it's sticky, because I've walked into some really sticky and competitive scenarios. I find the best way through it is a bigger why. In other words, a why for the company or for the customer that transcends what each group is trying to do. Because at the end of the day, it's not about what you're modeling or what you're doing or you're delivering or who you have access to and what room you're in the conversations with. It's about all of us working together to help the organization get ideas into action and to be able to help the customers. And then just finding ways for them to, describe on paper how they work together, inputs, outputs, so nobody feels overlap, and then finding an opportunity to actually work together on a real scenario to test it out. Then then we not only can test it, but we become a little bit better friends in the process.
Yeah, that's great. And Tucker, we have from Rick, so make sure we don't skip him since he's responsible for bringing you on here. So if
Yeah.
anybody's watching and they're maybe in between jobs, they need help or advice or whatever. Rick is kind of maybe it's called a reverse talent agent, but you think about Hollywood, people have talent agents and help promote them, kind of get different deals or movies or whatever. Rick does that, I'll say, from a professional perspective, and also extremely strong in the personal side and really all sides of your life. So anyway, so Rick asks, Whynde, I know your long range plan also includes teaching your true love, sharing your knowledge with the next generation of business architects and business professionals. What is the optimal way for you to accomplish these aspirations? Feel
Shout
like
out to Rick.
I actually talked to somebody today. Of course, I can't remember his name. He's in Fayetteville, Arkansas. He's a CRO, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna teach a sales class." I said, "I got friends, John Clavin, Jerry Doyle, Peter Bell, that do a class at Boston College, and they thought it was going to be the easiest thing, and they say it's like the hardest thing in the world." So anyway, go ahead.
Love it. Awesome. Shout out to Rick. Rick's amazing. For sure. If you think back to what I said earlier, really every day I wake up, I don't have a job. I serve a global vision in a global community, and that's really what I'm trying to do. So teaching is not only my sort of greatest passion and who I am; it's the best way I can scale. And for me, that I don't think that can be any one outlet. That is absolutely university, in particular business schools, the most relevant there, and it's also executives, and it's also the practitioners. So from small cohorts, as Rick says, to bigger groups, it's just getting into the groups of people who really want to learn these ideas, have a lot to share, and teaching really the full spectrum on how to turn idea into action. Thanks for the question, Rick.
There you
Absolutely.
go. It's great. It's amazing how lacking some of the universities are just in terms of what I could call it kind of practical. I've got a few friends, Ken Doherty, Kevin Connolly. We're doing something with a sales group at a University of Alabama in March. But it's the professors, I think, that are reaching out, that want the external help and advice, for sure, to be commended. And then, which in that case is the Alabama example. But then you have so many who are just that I've talked to here and there, and oh, okay, no thanks. I'm like, you got to be kidding! Like, we're offering all this stuff up for free. I'll give you books. I'll give you yeah. So, and then shout out Tucker. Maybe you can put my book up. Your go-to sales advisor. I highly recommend. It's as Randy's as you can tell, because I have it marked up. But anyway, so if you can pull that Tucker at some point, that would be great. And then I'm just going to buzz through some of the other comments here. Daryl said the 4-day work week is upon us. We'll see. Elsevier put this in place back in 2003 for the summer, based upon department and individual schedule. And then Dean asks, hi, Whynde, do you have a couple of canned wins / templates / verticals that you can bring to your customers or potential clients to start their journey? So certainly, one thing would be the kind of charts that I showed in here. Not that they're quite self-explanatory, but when you see it, you kind of mentally get the ball in the 50-yard line, and then you have to kind of read and understand probably to get the ball further. But I'll let you answer.
Yeah, you're exactly spot on. So a couple, let's give a couple. One is the golden thread. Take an idea, translate it into action. I mean, I don't have long enough on this show to tell you actually the insights that will come out of that, and the opportunities to sort of tweak process and have conversations that are new. So the golden thread, to translate something. The other one I would say is, and again, you could look at it as a canned win or template, but basically taking the investment portfolio. So whatever people have, submitted for dollars for, let's call those initiatives in whatever state, and overlaying the capabilities that they are going to uplift on top of that. So what that shows us is, where are people planning to invest in the same area? All right, where do we have gaps or overlaps? And then how does that, spend planned against capability compare to where the strategy wants to invest per capability? So those are two new powerful views. One is upstream, the golden thread. The investment is a little bit further downstream, but it's often a place where we can find, again, a lot of new insights. So it's a good place to plug in as sort of a canned win. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dean. So I've been saying Daryl, you said Darrell, so you may know better than me. But anyway, here's a touchy one. What are your thoughts about managing a business from a spiritual foundation? So again, back 30, 40 years ago, probably was a much easier thing. These days, I mean, you got to be careful even saying, forget about managing the business, but just kind of even what your own beliefs are, because you can get totally torpedoed from who knows where. But go ahead.
Oh, I love it. Great question, Darrell. Well, first of all, slightly tangential, but relevant. The idea of purpose and purpose in business has become a bigger, more important thing, I think, with our own human evolution, as well as what younger generations are expecting and things like that. So I think purpose is emerging as a stronger theme in many organizations. But I think my personal belief is, maybe this is a little bit along the lines of what you're saying, Randy. I don't know that one has to be outright about it. But if one does have a deep spiritual grounding, that person will show up in every interaction, in everything you write, in everything you do, in the decisions you make, and how you treat people. So I actually think sometimes it's even better just to show up as that sort of grounded person, if you're a spiritual person, and let that show through. And I don't think you have to call a lot of attention to it, but maybe arguably someone can make a case that helps to lead a good business.
Yeah. So probably not as much necessary branding it, but kind of just leading by example in terms of your
Yes.
behaviors and your actions and kind of what you do and how you do it.
Yes. Yes. And people will
Right.
ask questions if they feel something's
Yeah,
different or special and they want to know more. Absolutely.
totally. And Darrell says, I teach professional sales at Seton Hall University since 2009. Awesome. So, Darrell, if you want, you can look at sales community, click on the advisory board. You can click on New York. And I've not counted lately, but there's got to be 20, 30, 40 probably CROs who are all great. So if you want help for any speakers, feel free to ask for any introductions to any of them if that helps you at all. And then totally happy if you want to send me an email with your mailing address. You can do it on LinkedIn here, which I guess you'd be dialed into. Totally happy to get to you as well. And then Darrell says, love your answer. And Rick asks, I feel, Randy, on the topic of the universities and sales training, I've done some sales instruction, the most recent for Montclair State. I enjoyed it, but I have so much more to give. But the universities have a tough time accepting them more. I mean, yeah. What do you say?
I'm trying to not say too much because I do know a lot, and I am working with universities. There
That's why
is
we're
a
here. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah, there's a hard time accepting. There's a big not invented here syndrome, including when you said earlier too, Randy, when things are very practical and they're actually working in business. And I know this firsthand because this idea of strategy execution, we've done a study that says it's missing grossly in graduate business curriculums, but it's hard to get, it has to become their idea somehow, which is curious because then how do new ideas ever get into universities? So I do think it's, I'm going to say hats off to the universities and the leaders and the deans that embrace these ideas and are courageous to take them in, because we've just got to do that, especially as education is changing and for universities as well. So just to say, I very much agree. It's drip by drip. I will say a tiny win. The MBA Roundtable is recommending now a new Harvard Business Review on strategy execution as their required reading for strategy courses. I bring up that example to say drip by drip change happens, and I'm endlessly patient too. But I agree, you guys.
Yeah, it's probably almost analogous to some of the companies that kind of can't get out of their own way around just kind of our whole strategy discussion, right? Okay, they think they got it, they
Yep.
don't have it, and they're not
Yep.
doing all the right things around this area, right? Where there's all kinds of
Yep.
expertise and help that they can bring in.
Yep.
So Darrell, just because I know myself, I'm going to probably forget to grab it. Do me a favor, just send me a note on LinkedIn, or you can send me my email is just randy@salescommunity.com, and we can start a conversation that way if that's okay. Dean says thank you. Darrell says so true. Not a minute here. Rick says, I do like your new throne, Randy. So those are Beaver Creek
I
House
do
for,
too.
for while during the winter. And I must say, today was a awesome powder day, and I had second thoughts saying, geez, I can only get out here for 2 hours and I come back in, but very, 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 very worthwhile for sure. So you've been an amazing guest, Whynde. Totally appreciate it. Everybody asking the question, very engaging. As always, I didn't even get to the tip of the iceberg for all the other questions I was going to ask, but hopefully we catered it to those that were watching. So thank you so much for that. Thanks, Tucker, for your help behind the scenes. Spotlight AI, thank you for sponsoring. And next we did Whynde today because she has some travel going on this week. And then last week we did Kevin Delane, who is a CRO Cohesity, who I highly recommend you watch, because I had a CRO group out here in Beaver Creek. But next week, we're going to try and get back on schedule. So Costa Harbilis is a CRO at Intap. That'll be Wednesday, February 8th. His topic is uniqueness of selling into partner-led business models of professional and financial industries. And then week after that, February 15th, we have Paul Hunter, who runs North America for HPE as the managing director. And his topic will be reconfiguring and evolving sales teams, which they're on a big transformation mission as well. So, Whynde, any words in conclusion?
Just to say that big mountains are climbed step by step, one at a time. So if you are looking at this big change and these big ideas, there's no fast way to a mountain. It's just step by step, and I promise you will get there. I live it every day. So all the best. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Whynde. Have a great
Thank
day, and enjoy Norway and your travels this week.
Will do.